Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're like me, you've probably had those late gaming sessions where you're grinding away in Minecraft, building that perfect castle, or mining for diamonds, and you need something in the background to keep your brain entertained while your hands do the work. That's exactly what this is for. So tonight, whether you're building, farming, or just need something to listen to while you work, these stories are going to keep you hooked. Alright, let's jump into our first story. This one comes from someone who learned that even identical twins can't always fool everyone. My girlfriend's twin tried to pretend she was her. I'm still processing what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure how to feel about any of this. My girlfriend Rebecca has an identical twin sister named Amanda. They look exactly alike, down to the smallest details. Same height, same build, same facial features. The only way I can usually tell them apart is by their personalities and the way they dress. Rebecca and I have been together for about 2 years now. She's sweet, kind of shy, always wears these vintage band t-shirts, and has this habit of tucking her hair behind her right ear when she's nervous. Amanda, on the other hand, is more outgoing, dresses more formally, and has this confidence that Rebecca lacks. Last Friday, I was supposed to meet Rebecca at her apartment for our usual movie night. I have a key, so I let myself in and found who I thought was Rebecca sitting on the couch, wearing one of her typical band shirts and jeans. She smiled at me and patted the spot next to her. Something felt off immediately, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. She seemed more confident than usual, making direct eye contact in a way that Rebecca rarely does. Her posture was different too, more upright and assertive, but she was wearing Rebecca's clothes and had styled her hair the same way Rebecca always does. We started watching a movie, and she kept trying to cuddle closer to me. That should have been normal, but something about the way she was touching me felt wrong. Rebecca is usually more hesitant with physical affection, especially at the beginning of our evenings together. She needs time to warm up, but this version of Rebecca was immediately grabbing my hand, running her fingers through my hair, being unusually forward. About halfway through the movie, she excused herself to use the bathroom. While she was gone, I noticed Rebecca's phone sitting on the coffee table. It was unlocked, and I could see text messages from Amanda that were time-stamped from earlier that day. The messages were asking Rebecca about her plans for the evening and whether I would be coming over. When she came back from the bathroom, I decided to test something. I mentioned a conversation Rebecca and I had had the week before about her anxiety around her job interview. Rebecca had been really stressed about it and had spent almost an hour talking through her concerns with me. The woman sitting next to me looked confused for just a moment before saying, "Oh yeah, that interview." It went fine, but Rebecca's interview wasn't until next Tuesday. I knew because I had offered to drive her there. I looked at her more carefully and realised she was wearing Rebecca's clothes, but they fit slightly differently. Amanda is maybe half an inch taller than Rebecca, so the jeans were just a tiny bit too short. The band shirt, which usually hangs loose on Rebecca's frame, was fitting more snugly. I decided to confront her directly. I said, "Amanda, what are you doing?" She immediately dropped the act. Her entire demeanour changed. The shy, nervous energy disappeared and was replaced by Amanda's typical confidence. She looked me right in the eye and said, "I wanted to see if you could tell the difference." I was stunned. I asked her where Rebecca was, and she said Rebecca was at work and wouldn't be back until late. Amanda had apparently planned this whole thing, going through Rebecca's closet, copying her hairstyle, even studying the way Rebecca sits and moves. I asked her why she would do something like this, and her answer made my stomach drop. She said she'd been curious about what it would be like to be with me. She said she'd always wondered if I was really attracted to Rebecca or just attracted to their shared appearance. I told her that what she'd done was a huge violation of trust and boundaries. She tried to brush it off, saying it was just a harmless experiment and that nothing had really happened between us. But I felt completely violated. She had tricked me into physical intimacy under false pretenses. I left immediately and called Rebecca to tell her what had happened. Rebecca was horrified and apologetic, even though none of it was her fault. She said she had no idea Amanda was planning anything like this, and that Amanda had never done anything like this before. The worst part is that now I don't know if I can trust my own perception. If I couldn't tell the difference between them when Amanda was actively trying to impersonate Rebecca, what does that say about my relationship? Do I really know Rebecca as well as I thought I did? Rebecca wants to work through this together, and she's cut off contact with Amanda until further notice. But I keep thinking about those 2 hours I spent with Amanda, believing she was Rebecca. Every touch, every smile, every moment of intimacy was based on a lie. I don't know how to move forward from this. How do you rebuild trust when someone has shown they're willing to literally steal your girlfriend's identity to manipulate you? That story is over. The psychological manipulation here is absolutely insane. Imagine discovering that someone studied your girlfriend so carefully they could impersonate her for hours. The fact that Amanda thought this was just a harmless experiment shows a complete disconnect from reality. The trust issues this would create, not just with Amanda, but potentially with Rebecca too, would be devastating. Moving into our next story, this one shows how far some parents will go to control their children's futures. My mum burned my college acceptance letter. I'm 18 and I've been planning to go to college since I was in middle school. My mum and I live alone together. My dad left when I was 12, and since then it's just been the two of us. She works 2 jobs to support us, and I know she's made a lot of sacrifices for me over the years. Throughout high school, I maintained a high GPA and was involved in several extracurricular activities. I applied to 6 different colleges, including my dream school, which is about 3 hours away from home. I knew it would be hard to leave my mum, but I also knew that getting a college education was important for my future. For months, I'd been checking the mailbox obsessively, waiting for acceptance letters. My mum kept asking me about my college plans, and whenever I mentioned schools that were far away, she'd get this worried look on her face. She'd make comments about how expensive college is and how I could just go to the community college nearby and live at home. I understood her concerns, but I'd already applied for financial aid and scholarships. I was willing to take out student loans if necessary. I'd worked part-time jobs throughout high school and had saved up some money. I was determined to make college work somehow. 3 weeks ago, I was expecting to hear back from my dream school. They had said decisions would be mailed out by that date, and I was checking the mailbox multiple times a day, but nothing came. I started to worry that maybe my application had gotten lost or that there was some kind of delay. I checked my email constantly and even called the admissions office to make sure they had my correct mailing address. The admissions counsellor confirmed that they had mailed my decision letter to the correct address over a week ago. She seemed confused when I told her I hadn't received it and suggested I contact the post office to see if there had been any delivery issues. That night, I asked my mum if she'd seen any mail from the college. She said no and suggested that maybe the letter had gotten lost in the mail. She seemed genuinely sympathetic and even offered to call the post office with me the next day. But something about her reaction felt off. She was almost too eager to help, and she kept suggesting alternatives like the community college or taking a gap year to work and save money. 2 days later, I was taking out the trash when I noticed something in our outdoor fire pit that we use for backyard barbecues. There were pieces of burned paper mixed in with the ashes from the last time we'd grilled. I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it, except I could see part of what looked like an official letterhead that hadn't been completely burned. I pulled out the partially burned pieces and tried to piece them together. What I found made my heart stop. It was my college acceptance letter. I could make out part of my name, part of the college's letterhead, and most importantly, the word congratulations, followed by pleased to inform you that you have been accepted. I had been accepted to my dream school, and my mum had burned the letter. I confronted her that evening. At first she tried to deny it, but when I showed her the burned pieces, she broke down crying. She admitted that she had intercepted the letter from the mailbox and burned it because she couldn't bear the thought of me leaving. She said she knew it was wrong, but she was terrified of being alone. She said that I was all she had left, and the thought of me moving 3 hours away felt impossible to handle. She had convinced herself that if I never saw the acceptance letter, I would just assume I hadn't gotten in and would choose to stay local. I was furious and heartbroken at the same time. This was my future she was messing with. I had worked so hard throughout high school, and she had almost taken away my opportunity without me even knowing it. I called the college the next day and explained what had happened. Fortunately, the admissions counsellor was understanding and was able to email me a copy of my acceptance letter, along with information about financial aid and housing. But now, I'm faced with a terrible situation. I'm still planning to go to college in the fall, but my relationship with my mum is severely damaged. She betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, and I don't know how to forgive her for it. She's been apologising constantly and begging me to forgive her. She says she knows what she did was wrong and that she was just scared. But how do I trust someone who is willing to sabotage my future because of her own fears? The worst part is that I understand why she did it. I know she loves me and doesn't want me to leave, but love shouldn't involve destroying someone's opportunities and lying about it. I'm still going to college, but now instead of it being an exciting new chapter, it's tainted by this betrayal. Every time I think about leaving for school, I think about how my mum tried to prevent it from happening. That story is over. The desperation of a parent trying to keep their child close is understandable, but burning an acceptance letter crosses every possible line. The fact that she was willing to let her daughter believe she'd been rejected and potentially derail her entire future is absolutely heartbreaking. Some protective instincts become destructive when taken too far. Our next tale comes from someone who discovered their friend's scheme for easy money. My friend faked a break-in for insurance money. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what I witnessed, and I honestly don't know if I should report this or just cut ties and move on. My friend Daniel and I have known each other since college. We're both in our mid-20s now, and we've stayed pretty close over the years. He's always been the type of person who looks for shortcuts and get-rich-quick schemes, but I never thought he'd cross a line like this. Daniel recently moved into a nice apartment in an upscale part of town. It was way above what I knew he could afford on his salary from his retail job, but he always talked about having some side hustles and investments that were paying off. I figured maybe he'd gotten lucky with cryptocurrency or something. About 2 months ago, Daniel started complaining about money troubles. He said his investments had gone south and he was struggling to make rent. He seemed genuinely stressed about it, talking about how he might have to move back in with his parents if he couldn't figure something out soon. Last Tuesday, Daniel called me sounding panicked. He said his apartment had been broken into while he was at work and that thieves had stolen his laptop, his gaming console, some jewellery and cash he'd been keeping in his dresser. He asked if I could come over to help him deal with the police and insurance company. When I got to his apartment, something immediately felt wrong. The front door wasn't damaged at all, but Daniel claimed the thieves had come in through a window. The window in question was on the second floor, and there was no fire escape or easy way to access it from outside. Inside the apartment, things looked staged. There was broken glass on the floor near the window, but it was scattered in a way that looked like the window had been broken from the inside, not from someone breaking in. Some drawers were pulled out and papers were scattered around, but it looked too neat, like someone had carefully arranged things to look messy. Daniel was talking to the police officer, giving his statement about what had been stolen, but I noticed something odd. His supposedly stolen gaming console was sitting right there on the entertainment centre, partially hidden behind some books. When I pointed it out to him quietly, he quickly said that was his old broken one, and the thieves had taken his newer system. After the police left, Daniel seemed relieved and started talking about how much money the insurance company would give him for his stolen items. He mentioned that he'd been smart about keeping receipts for everything, and had even taken photos of his expensive items for insurance purposes. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong everything felt. The next day, I decided to drive by Daniel's apartment during my lunch break. I parked across the street and watched for about an hour. Around 2 p.m, I saw Daniel leave his apartment carrying a large duffel bag. He put it in his car and drove to a storage unit facility about 10 minutes away. I followed him at a distance and watched as he unloaded the bag into a storage unit. After he left, I waited a few minutes, then approached the storage facility. I couldn't get inside without a key code, but I could see through the chain link fence. The storage unit Daniel had used was slightly open, and I could clearly see his gaming console, laptop, and what looked like jewellery boxes sitting inside. Daniel had faked the entire break-in. He'd broken his own window from the inside, staged the scene to look like a burglary, and hidden his stolen items in a storage unit. He was planning to collect insurance money for items he still had. I confronted him the next day. At first, he tried to deny it, but when I told him I'd seen him at the storage facility, he broke down and admitted everything. He said he was desperate and behind on rent by 3 months. His landlord was threatening to evict him, and he didn't know what else to do. He begged me not to report him, saying that insurance fraud was a felony, and he could go to prison. He promised he would return the items to his apartment and cancel the insurance claim. He said he just needed time to figure out another solution to his money problems. I told him he had until the end of the week to come clean to the insurance company, or I would report him myself. He agreed, but I could tell he was just saying what I wanted to hear. It's been a week now, and I don't know if Daniel has followed through on his promise. I've been avoiding his calls because I don't know what to say to him. Part of me feels bad for him because I know he's struggling financially, but what he did was fraud, and it's not fair to the insurance company or to other customers who have to pay higher premiums because of people like him. The worst part is that I don't know if I can trust him anymore. If he's willing to lie to police and insurance companies, what else might he lie about? Our entire friendship feels tainted now because I know what he's capable of when he's desperate. That story's over. The lengths people will go to when they're backed into a financial corner never cease to amaze me. Staging your own burglary and lying to police is such a massive escalation from just asking for help. Now this person has to choose between protecting a friendship and doing what's right legally. Let's move on to our next story, which shows how family disputes over money can bring out the absolute worst in people. My aunt tried to steal my inheritance. This whole situation started 6 months ago when my grandfather passed away. He was 92 and had been sick for a while, so his death wasn't unexpected, but it was still devastating for our family. He'd been like a second father to me after my dad died when I was 15. My grandfather had always been very clear about his wishes regarding his estate. He owned a house that had been in our family for 3 generations, plus he had some savings and investments. He'd told me multiple times over the years that he wanted me to inherit the house, because I was the only grandchild who had shown interest in maintaining family traditions and preserving family history. I'd spent countless weekends at that house, helping him with repairs, listening to stories about our ancestors, and learning about the family genealogy he'd been researching for decades. My Aunt Patricia, his daughter, had always seemed disinterested in the house and family history. She lived across the country and visited maybe once a year. When my grandfather drew up his will 5 years ago, he made his intentions clear. I would inherit the house and most of his personal belongings, while Patricia would receive his financial assets, which were worth more than the house anyway. He felt this was fair because Patricia had always been more interested in money than sentimental items. After the funeral, we met with my grandfather's lawyer to read the will. Everything was exactly as my grandfather had explained to me over the years. I would get the house, and Patricia would get the bulk of his financial assets. The lawyer explained that we had 30 days to contest the will if anyone had objections. Patricia seemed upset during the reading, but she didn't say anything at the time. I assumed she was just grieving and processing everything. The lawyer gave us copies of all the documents and explained the next steps for transferring ownership of various assets. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the lawyer saying that Patricia had filed a contest to the will. She was claiming that my grandfather had been mentally incompetent when he wrote it, and that she deserved the house because she was his only child. I was shocked because my grandfather had been sharp as a tack right up until the end. He'd been managing his own finances, driving himself to appointments, and having detailed conversations about current events just weeks before he died. Patricia hired an expensive lawyer and started building a case that my grandfather had dementia and that I had somehow manipulated him into changing his will. She claimed that the original will from 10 years earlier had left everything to her, and that my grandfather had only added me to the will after I'd started visiting him more frequently. The problem was that Patricia's claims were completely false. My grandfather had never had an earlier will that left everything to her. The will we'd read was his first and only will, created 5 years ago when he was 77 and in perfect mental health. But Patricia wasn't just relying on false claims about my grandfather's mental state. She'd also forged documents to support her case. She presented what she claimed was a letter from my grandfather to her lawyer, stating that he wanted to change his will back to leave everything to her. The handwriting looked like my grandfather's at first glance, but something about it seemed off to me. I knew his handwriting very well from years of reading his letters and notes. I asked our lawyer to have the document examined by a handwriting expert. The expert confirmed what I suspected. The letter was a forgery. Someone had traced my grandfather's signature and handwriting from other documents, but they'd made small mistakes that were obvious under professional analysis. When confronted with the evidence that she'd forged documents, Patricia doubled down. She claimed that I must have somehow altered the expert's analysis or bribed them to lie. She accused me of being the one manipulating the legal system. The judge wasn't having any of it. Patricia's lawyer withdrew from the case when the forgery was discovered, apparently not wanting to be associated with document fraud. Patricia tried to represent herself, but just made things worse by continuing to make accusations without evidence. The will contest was dismissed, and I inherited the house as my grandfather had intended. But the legal battle cost both of us thousands of dollars in attorney fees, and it delayed the entire estate settlement by 6 months. The worst part is that Patricia's actions destroyed our family relationship permanently. I tried to reach out to her after everything was settled, thinking maybe we could repair things and move forward. But she's convinced that I somehow stole her inheritance, and that the entire legal system conspired against her. She's been telling other family members her version of events, claiming that I manipulated a senile old man and forged documents to steal her rightful inheritance. Some relatives treating me differently at family gatherings. I, who don't know the full story, have kept all the legal documents and expert reports proving that Patricia forged documents and lied throughout the process. But I don't want to have to defend myself constantly at every family event. It's exhausting, having to prove your innocence when someone is determined to paint you as a villain. The house that was supposed to be a blessing and a connection to my family's history has become a source of stress and conflict. Every time I walk through those rooms where my grandfather and I spent so much time together, I think about Patricia's accusations and the legal battle. I know my grandfather would be heartbroken to see how his death tore the family apart. He always valued family unity and would never have wanted his estate to cause this kind of conflict. But Patricia's greed and willingness to forge documents made it impossible to resolve things peacefully. That story is over. Forging legal documents to steal someone's inheritance is beyond despicable, especially when it involves lying about an elderly person's mental capacity. The fact that she's now spreading lies to other family members shows she's completely committed to rewriting history rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. Next up, we have a story about discovering infidelity in the most modern way possible. I found my husband on a dating app while married. I'm still in shock about this, and I don't know how to process what I discovered. My husband Ryan and I have been married for 4 years, together for 7 total. I thought we had a solid relationship, with normal ups and downs, but nothing that seemed seriously wrong. Last month, my single friend Kelly was showing me some of the dating profiles she'd been looking at on various apps. We were having a girls' night, and she was asking for my opinion on whether certain guys seemed worth messaging. I was enjoying living vicariously through her dating adventures since I'd been off the market for so long. Kelly was swiping through profiles on one of the popular dating apps when a familiar face appeared on her screen. It was Ryan. Not someone who looks like Ryan, but definitely my husband, using photos I recognized from our recent vacation. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Kelly immediately realized what had happened and started apologizing, thinking maybe she'd made a mistake. But there was no mistake. It was definitely Ryan's profile, complete with photos from our trip to Colorado last summer. The profile said he was 31, which is his correct age, and that he lived in our city. His bio mentioned his job and some of his hobbies, all accurate information. What killed me was that his relationship status was listed as single. Kelly offered to let me look through the profile more carefully. Ryan had posted 5 photos, 3 of which I'd taken myself during our various trips together. In one picture, you could even see my reflection in his sunglasses, but apparently he thought no one would notice that detail. His bio talked about looking for something serious and mentioned that he was ready to settle down with the right person. The irony was devastating. He was advertising himself as relationship material while already being married to me. I asked Kelly if there was a way to see when he'd last been active on the app. She showed me that his profile indicated he'd been online within the past 24 hours. This wasn't some old profile from before we got married that he'd forgotten to delete. This was active, recent usage. I went home that night and acted completely normal. Ryan was watching TV on the couch and I sat next to him, like nothing had happened. But inside, I was falling apart. I kept looking at him and wondering how long this had been going on and whether he'd actually met up with anyone from the app. The next day, while Ryan was at work, I created a fake dating profile using photos of my friend who lives in another state. I set my location to our city and started looking for Ryan's profile. It didn't take long to find him. I matched with him using the fake profile and waited to see if he would message me. Within a few hours, he'd sent a message saying I was beautiful and asking if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. He was actively trying to set up dates with other women. I continued the conversation for a few days, pretending to be interested in meeting him. Ryan was charming and flirty, using the same lines and jokes that he'd used when we first started dating years ago. It was like watching a replay of how he'd won me over, except now he was using those same tactics to cheat on me. During our fake conversation, Ryan mentioned that he'd recently gotten out of a long-term relationship and was looking for someone who wanted something real. He said he was tired of games and wanted to find his person. The lies were so elaborate and convincing that I almost believed them myself. After a week of messaging, Ryan suggested meeting for drinks at a bar downtown. I agreed, using the fake profile, and we set up a date for Friday night. Ryan told me he was going out with work friends that Friday, which I now knew was a lie. I didn't show up to the fake date, but I did drive by the bar to see if Ryan was actually there. Sure enough, he was sitting at a table by himself, checking his phone constantly and looking around for someone who would never arrive. When he came home that night, he seemed frustrated and mentioned that his work friends had cancelled their plans at the last minute. He said he'd ended up just going to a bar by himself and having a quiet drink before coming home. The casual way he lied to my face was almost worse than discovering the dating profile. This wasn't just about him being on dating apps. He was actively lying to me about where he was going and what he was doing, creating an entire false narrative to cover his tracks. I finally confronted him the next morning. I showed him screenshots of his dating profile and our entire conversation through the fake account. His face went through several different expressions before settling on what looked like resignation. He tried to explain it away at first, saying he wasn't actually meeting anyone and was just seeing if he still had it. He claimed he was going through some kind of midlife crisis and wanted to feel attractive and wanted again. He said he would never actually cheat on me physically. I pointed out that he'd literally shown up to meet someone for a date, which seemed pretty physical to me. He backtracked and said that was just curiosity, that he probably would have backed out if the person had actually shown up. His explanations kept changing, as I pressed him for details. First, it was just curiosity. Then it was a confidence boost. Then it was because he felt like we'd gotten boring and predictable. Each new reason felt like another lie. The thing that hurt most was realizing how much effort he'd put into this deception. He'd carefully selected photos, crafted a bio, maintained conversations with multiple women, and created elaborate cover stories for his activities. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained campaign of betrayal. Ryan is begging me not to leave, saying it was all just fantasy and that he never intended for anything real to happen. But I can't get past the fact that he was willing to show up to meet another woman while lying to me about where he was going. I don't know how to rebuild trust with someone who was living a double life so convincingly. If he could lie about this so easily, what else might he be hiding? That story is over. The just seeing if I still had it excuse is probably one of the weakest attempts at damage control I've ever heard. The fact that he actually showed up to meet someone proves this went way beyond curiosity. Some people really think they can have their cake and eat it too. Our next story shows how workplace theft can get incredibly personal when someone steals credit for your ideas. My boss stole my idea and got promoted. I work at a mid-sized marketing agency, and I've been there for about 3 years. I'm part of the creative team, and while the work can be demanding, I genuinely love coming up with campaigns and seeing them come to life. My boss, Trevor, has been with the company for about 8 years and manages our entire creative department. About 4 months ago, our agency landed a huge client, a tech startup, that wanted a complete rebrand and marketing campaign for their product launch. This was the kind of account that could make careers, and everyone in the department was excited about the opportunity to work on it. Trevor assigned me to work on preliminary concepts for the pitch. I spent weeks researching the company, their target demographic, and their competitors. I came up with what I thought was a brilliant concept that played on the idea of connection and community, which was perfect for their social media platform. My idea centered around the tagline, "Find Your Frequency," and involved a campaign where real users would share stories about meaningful connections they'd made through the platform. The visual design used sound wave patterns and vibrant colors that represented different personalities coming together. I put together a comprehensive presentation with mock-ups, sample ads, social media concepts, and even ideas for influencer partnerships. I was really proud of the work and felt like it captured exactly what the client was looking for. I presented my concept to Trevor and the rest of the team during our weekly creative meeting. Everyone seemed impressed, and Trevor took detailed notes throughout my presentation. He asked me to send him all my files so he could review everything more carefully before we moved forward. Trevor said he wanted to refine the concept a bit more before presenting it to the client, which seemed reasonable. He told me to focus on some other smaller projects while he worked on polishing the pitch for this major account. A week later, Trevor scheduled a meeting with the entire creative team to present the final concept for the big client. I was excited to see how he'd build on my initial idea and to be part of the presentation process. But when Trevor started his presentation, my stomach dropped. He was presenting my exact concept, down to the smallest details. The tagline, the visual design, the user story approach, even some of the specific wording I'd used in my original presentation. Everything was identical. The only difference was that Trevor was presenting it as his own original work. He talked about his creative process, his inspiration for the concept, and how he developed each element of the campaign. He never mentioned my name or acknowledged that I'd contributed anything to the project. I sat there in complete shock watching my boss take credit for weeks of my work in front of our entire team and the senior executives who had joined the meeting. When people complimented the brilliant concept, Trevor accepted their praise with a smile. After the meeting, I pulled Trevor aside and asked him what had happened to my concept. He looked confused and said that after reviewing my initial ideas, he'd decided to go in a completely different direction. He claimed the presentation I'd just watched was entirely his own work. I couldn't believe he was lying to my face so blatantly. I told him that his presentation was identical to what I'd shown him the week before, but he insisted that any similarities were just coincidence. He said that great minds often think alike, and that my concept had been too rough and underdeveloped to present to such an important client. I asked him to return my original files so I could prove that his presentation was based on my work. Trevor said he deleted my files after deciding not to use them, but that I was welcome to try to recreate my concept if I wanted to compare them. The client loved Trevor's presentation, and our agency won the account. Trevor was praised by the senior partners for his innovative thinking and creative vision. Within a month, he was promoted to creative director and got a significant raise. Meanwhile, I was left working on smaller projects and watching Trevor get all the recognition for my work. The worst part was that other team members started treating Trevor like some kind of creative genius, asking for his advice and trying to learn from his success. I considered reporting what happened to HR, but I realized it would be my word against Trevor's, and he had already established the narrative that the concept was his original work. I had no way to prove that I'd created it first, since he claimed to have deleted all my files. The situation got even worse when Trevor started giving interviews to industry publications about his award-winning campaign. He talked about his creative process and shared insights about developing innovative concepts. Reading those articles and seeing him get recognition for my work was devastating. I started looking for a new job immediately, but the damage to my confidence was significant. I kept second-guessing my own abilities and wondering if maybe my original concept really wasn't as good as I thought it was. 3 months after Trevor's promotion, I finally found a position at a different agency. During my exit interview, I briefly mentioned what had happened with the stolen concept, but the HR representative seemed skeptical and suggested that creative ideas often evolve through collaboration. Trevor sent me a friendly goodbye email when I left, saying he'd enjoyed working with me and that he was sure I'd do great things at my new job. The casual way he acted like nothing had happened was almost worse than the original theft. I'm doing well at my new agency now, but I'm much more careful about sharing my ideas and making sure I have documentation for everything I create. The experience taught me that some people will steal your work without any guilt or remorse if they think they can get away with it. That story's over. The casual way Trevor deleted the evidence and then acted like a creative genius in interviews is absolutely infuriating. Some people have zero shame when it comes to advancing their careers at others' expense. At least this person learned to protect their work going forward. Our next story reveals how family members can become completely unhinged when they disagree with your parenting choices. My sister-in-law tried to rename my baby. I gave birth to my daughter 3 months ago, and my husband and I chose the name Violet for her. We love the name because it's classic, but not too common, and it has special meaning for us since my grandmother's middle name was Violet. My sister-in-law Brenda has very strong opinions about everything, especially when it comes to family matters. She's been married to my husband's brother for about 10 years, and she's always acted like she's the expert on all things family related because she had kids first. From the moment we announced our pregnancy, Brenda started giving us unsolicited advice about everything from nursery colours to feeding schedules. I tried to be polite and just nod along, but her constant input was exhausting. When we shared that we'd chosen the name Violet, Brenda's reaction was immediate and harsh. She said it was an old lady name that would get our daughter teased at school. She suggested we consider more modern names like Madison or Kaylee instead. My husband and I politely told Brenda that we'd made our decision and were happy with the name Violet. We thought that would be the end of the discussion, but we were wrong. After Violet was born, Brenda came to visit us in the hospital. She spent the entire visit calling our daughter by different names. She'd say things like, "Hello there, sweetie," or "How's my little angel doing?" She completely avoided using Violet's actual name. At first I thought maybe she was just having trouble adjusting to the name we'd chosen. Some people need time to get used to new names, and I was willing to be patient. But then Brenda started calling our daughter Lily instead of Violet. When I corrected her, She said that Lily was such a prettier flower name and that she was sure we'd come to our senses eventually and change it. I told Brenda firmly that our daughter's name was Violet, not Lily, and that I needed her to respect our choice. Brenda laughed and said she was just giving the baby a nice nickname until we picked something better. The situation escalated when Brenda started introducing Violet to other people as Lily. At a family gathering, she walked around carrying my daughter and telling relatives, "This is little Lily, isn't she beautiful?" I was mortified and immediately corrected her in front of everyone, explaining that the baby's name was Violet. Brenda acted like I was being overly sensitive and said that family nicknames were perfectly normal. My husband finally stepped in and told his brother that Brenda needed to stop calling our daughter by a different name. His brother said he'd talk to her, but nothing changed. Brenda even went so far as to buy personalised items with Lily embroidered on them. She gave us a baby blanket, some onesies and a stuffed animal, all featuring the wrong name. When I pointed out the mistake, she said the items were so cute that maybe it was a sign we should reconsider. The final straw came when I discovered that Brenda had been posting photos of Violet on her social media accounts, but she was tagging them with captions about her beautiful niece Lily. She was literally presenting our daughter to the world with a completely different name. I confronted Brenda directly and told her that her behaviour was completely unacceptable. I explained that deliberately calling someone by the wrong name is disrespectful and hurtful, and that she was undermining our authority as parents. Brenda's response was that she was just trying to help us avoid making a mistake we'd regret later. She said that when Violet grew up and was teased about her name, she'd thank Brenda for trying to give her a better option. I told Brenda that she was no longer welcome to visit our home or spend time with Violet until she could respect our daughter's name. My husband supported my decision, which caused a huge rift in his family. Brenda has been telling other family members that I'm being dramatic and controlling, and that she was just trying to be helpful. Some relatives have taken her side, saying that family members should be allowed to give nicknames. But this wasn't about nicknames. This was about someone deliberately refusing to acknowledge our child's identity and trying to impose her own preferences on our family decisions. My husband's parents have tried to mediate, suggesting that maybe we could compromise and let Brenda call Violet by a different nickname that we all agreed on. But I don't think this is about compromise. It's about respect and boundaries. Violet is now 3 months old, and Brenda still hasn't used her real name once. She continues to call her Lily when she talks about her to other people, and she acts like she's the victim in this situation. I refuse to back down on this issue, because I know that if I let Brenda get away with renaming my daughter, she'll continue to overstep boundaries in other areas of our parenting. This is about establishing that my husband and I are the parents, and our decisions need to be respected. That story is over. Deliberately calling someone's child by a different name for months is psychological warfare disguised as helpful suggestions. The fact that she bought personalised items with the wrong name shows this was a calculated campaign to undermine their parenting authority. Some people really think they know better than actual parents. Moving on to a story that proves you never really know who might be living right under your nose. I found out my neighbour was living in my garage. I live in a single-family house with a detached garage that I mostly use for storage. I park my car in the driveway because the garage is filled with boxes, old furniture, and seasonal decorations that I never got around to organising properly. About 6 months ago, I started noticing small things that seemed off. Sometimes I'd find the garage door unlocked when I was sure I'd locked it. Occasionally, items would be moved slightly from where I remembered leaving them. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness and didn't think much of it. I also started smelling food cooking sometimes when I was in my backyard, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. My immediate neighbours are elderly and don't cook much, so the smell seemed out of place. I assumed maybe someone new had moved into one of the houses behind mine. Then I started noticing that some of my stored items were going missing. Nothing valuable, just small things like an old camping chair, some blankets, and a few kitchen items that I'd packed away when I moved in. I figured maybe I'd donated them and forgotten about it. The first real red flag came when I found empty food containers in my garage trash can. I never eat in the garage, so finding takeout containers and water bottles in there was confusing. I wondered if maybe the garbage collectors had mixed up some trash, but it kept happening. One evening, I was in my backyard around sunset when I heard what sounded like a small radio playing music very quietly. The sound was coming from the direction of my garage, but that didn't make sense because I don't have any electronics stored out there. I decided to investigate by walking around to the side of the garage where there's a small window. When I looked inside, I couldn't believe what I saw. Someone had created a living space in the back corner, behind some large boxes. There was a mattress on the floor, a small battery-powered lamp, some clothes hanging from a makeshift rod, and what looked like a camping stove on a small table. My missing camping chair was set up like a little reading nook, and my old blankets were arranged on the mattress. I was terrified and confused. Someone had been living in my garage without my knowledge, using my stored items to create their own little apartment. I immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the garage but didn't find anyone inside. However, they confirmed that someone had definitely been living there. The setup was too elaborate and organised to be temporary. The police suggested I change the locks on the garage and install some security cameras to catch whoever was trespassing. They said this type of situation was more common than I'd realised, especially with people experiencing homelessness, looking for safe places to stay. I felt terrible about the idea that someone might be homeless and desperate enough to live secretly in my garage, but I also felt violated that someone had been accessing my property without permission for months. I installed a camera and changed the locks that weekend. For a few days, nothing happened, and I thought maybe the person had been scared off by the police visit. But then I caught him on camera. It was my neighbour from 3 houses down, a guy named Martin who I'd met briefly when I first moved in. He seemed like a normal middle-aged man who worked in construction and lived alone. The footage showed Martin arriving at my garage around midnight, using some kind of tool to jimmy the new lock I'd installed. He'd figured out how to get in despite my security measures. I watched several days of footage and realised that Martin had been coming to my garage almost every night, usually arriving after 11 p.m. and leaving before 6 a.m. He'd set up a whole routine, cooking simple meals on the camping stove, reading books, and even doing some kind of exercises in the space. When I confronted Martin with the video evidence, he broke down completely. He explained that he'd lost his job 6 months ago and couldn't afford his rent anymore. He was too embarrassed to tell anyone about his financial situation, so he'd been secretly living in my garage while pretending everything was normal. Martin said he'd chosen my garage because it was detached from the house and filled with enough stuff that he could hide his presence easily. He thought I wouldn't notice as long as he was careful and quiet. He'd been showering at the gym and doing his laundry at the laundromat to maintain his appearance. During the day, he'd leave the garage and spend time at the library or looking for work, then return at night to sleep. I felt conflicted about the whole situation. On one hand, Martin had been trespassing on my property and essentially stealing utilities and storage space. On the other hand, he was clearly desperate and hadn't caused any real damage or tried to enter my house. Martin offered to pay me back for anything he'd used and begged me not to press charges. He said he'd finally found a new job and would be getting his first paycheck in 2 weeks, which would allow him to get back on his feet. I decided not to call the police again, but I told Martin he couldn't continue staying in my garage. I gave him 2 weeks to find alternative housing and offered to let him store some of his belongings in the garage temporarily while he got situated. Martin was incredibly grateful and kept his word. He found a small apartment across town and moved out of my garage within the deadline. He even left money to cover the cost of the utilities he'd used and replace the items he'd borrowed. The whole experience made me realise how close to the edge some people are living, even when they appear to have their lives together. Martin seemed like a regular guy, but he'd been secretly homeless for months without anyone knowing. That story is over. The fact that someone can lose their job and end up secretly living in a stranger's garage while maintaining the appearance of normal life is both heartbreaking and terrifying. At least Martin tried to make things right when he got caught, but imagine how many people are struggling invisibly around us. Let's move to our next story, which shows how new relationships can bring unexpected challenges with blended families. My dad's girlfriend tried to replace my mum. My parents divorced when I was 14, and my mum passed away in a car accident 2 years later. It was devastating, and my dad and I both struggled with grief for a long time. My dad didn't date anyone for almost 3 years after my mum died. About a year ago, my dad met someone named Carol at his work. She seemed nice enough at first, and I was actually happy that my dad was trying to move forward with his life. He deserved to find companionship and happiness after everything we'd been through. Carol started coming around more often, and eventually she was spending most weekends at our house. She was friendly to me and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me and understanding our family dynamic. The first sign of trouble came when Carol suggested we redecorate the living room. She said the space felt outdated and could use a more modern touch. My dad seemed open to the idea, but I was uncomfortable because my mum had chosen most of the furniture and decorations in that room. I mentioned to Carol that I'd prefer to keep the living room the way it was because it held sentimental value. She said she understood, but suggested we could honour my mum's memory in other ways while still updating the space to reflect our current family. A few weeks later, I came home from school to find that Carol had rearranged the furniture and added several new decorative items. She'd also removed some of my mum's things, including a vase that had been my mum's favourite, and some family photos that had been on the mantel for years. When I asked Carol where my mum's things had gone, she said she'd packed them away carefully and that we could display them in my bedroom if I wanted. She explained that she thought it would be healthier for everyone if the common areas reflected our current family rather than dwelling on the past. I was upset and asked my dad to talk to Carol about putting my mum's things back where they belonged. My dad seemed torn between wanting to support Carol's efforts to make herself at home and wanting to respect my feelings about preserving my mum's memory. The situation escalated when I discovered that Carol had thrown away several items that belonged to my mum. She claimed they were just old paperwork and trinkets that were taking up space, but among the discarded items were some of my mum's handwritten recipes and a small jewellery box that had been my grandmother's. I was furious and confronted Carol about throwing away things that weren't hers to discard. She said she was just trying to help us declutter and move forward, but that she'd be more careful about checking with us before getting rid of anything. But Carol's behaviour continued to escalate. She started referring to herself as my stepmom, even though she and my dad weren't married. She'd introduced me to her friends as her daughter and would correct people who referred to her as my dad's girlfriend. The breaking point came when Carol suggested that we take down the large wedding photo of my parents that had been hanging in the hallway since before my mum died. She said it made her uncomfortable to have a picture of my dad with another woman so prominently displayed in what was now their shared home. I told Carol that this was still my mum's house too, and that removing her photos would be like erasing her memory. Carol said she wasn't trying to replace my mum, but that it was important for our family to move forward and create new memories together. My dad finally stepped in when he saw how upset I was getting. He told Carol that we needed to find a balance between honouring the past and building our future, but that major changes to the house needed to be discussed with both of us first. Carol seemed to back off for a while, but then I started noticing that she was slowly removing my mum's things in small increments. A photo would disappear from a side table one week. A decorative pillow would vanish the next. When I'd ask about missing items, Carol would claim she didn't know what had happened to them. I started taking photos of rooms in our house so I could document what was disappearing. It became clear that Carol was systematically removing traces of my mum from our home, hoping I wouldn't notice if she did it gradually. When I confronted my dad with evidence of what Carol was doing, he was shocked. He said he'd noticed that some things seemed different but hadn't realised it was a deliberate pattern. He promised to talk to Carol about respecting our family's history and my mum's memory. The conversation between my dad and Carol didn't go well. Carol accused me of being unable to accept change and said that I was preventing our family from moving forward. She claimed that keeping so many reminders of my mum around was unhealthy for everyone. My dad had to choose between supporting his girlfriend's desire to make the house her own and protecting his deceased wife's memory and his daughter's feelings. He chose to support me, which led to a huge fight with Carol. Carol moved out the next week, claiming that she couldn't be in a relationship where she was competing with a ghost. She said my dad would never be able to fully commit to a new relationship while he was still clinging to the past. I felt guilty about causing problems in my dad's relationship, but I also felt relieved that someone was finally standing up for my mum's memory. My dad assured me that I hadn't done anything wrong and that Carol's behaviour had been inappropriate. The whole experience made me realise how difficult it can be to blend families, especially when there's been a death rather than a divorce. New partners sometimes feel threatened by the memory of deceased spouses, but trying to erase that history isn't the solution. That story's over. Slowly disappearing someone's deceased mother's belongings while claiming it's for everyone's good is absolutely vile behaviour. The fact that she was doing it gradually hoping no one would notice shows how calculated and manipulative she really was. Some people have no respect for grief or family history. Our next story shows how far some people will go just to get free food. My roommate stole my identity for free pizza. This happened about 2 months ago, and I'm still dealing with the fallout. I live with my roommate Alex in a small apartment near campus. We've been roommates for about a year, and up until recently, everything seemed pretty normal between us. Alex has always been the type of person who orders food constantly. Pizza, Chinese, burgers, you name it. He never cooked and seemed to live entirely on delivery apps. I always thought it was weird how much he was spending on food, given that he was always complaining about being broke, but I figured it wasn't my business how he managed his money. About 3 months ago, I started getting weird calls from pizza places asking to confirm orders that I hadn't made. The first few times I just told them they had the wrong number and hung up, but it kept happening, sometimes multiple times a day. Then I started getting emails confirming food deliveries to my address that I definitely hadn't ordered. The emails were going to my personal email account, and they showed orders for massive amounts of food. We're talking $50 orders multiple times a week. That's just the beginning of what people will do for convenience. The mental gymnastics required to justify stealing someone's identity for pizza delivery accounts is honestly impressive in the worst way possible. All right, everyone, that wraps up tonight's collection of Reddit stories. Whether you finished that castle, finally found those diamonds, or just needed some company during a long gaming session, I hope these tales kept you entertained. The internet really is full of people living through the most unbelievable situations, and somehow they all end up documented for the rest of us to discover. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight, and I'll catch you in the next one.